United Nations Security Council resolutions and swapping talks of rapid nuclear advances North Korea has made despite the strict sanctions imposed on them from past offenses. This unpredictable behavior and violent threats against nations have the average global citizen wondering why the North Korean regime hasn't been taken care of yet. Why, after decades of isolation, famine, poor services and constant fear of North Korean citizens not been liberated, regimes have fallen for much less. I think it's time we look at ways to handle North Korea once and for all. I will go through every method that has some chance of success as well as those that are incredibly unwise. So for a task as important as this, as an Asian seems to be a very attractive option, spies and movies secretly slip into foreign countries to topple governments for their respective agencies. So can the same be done for Kim Jong-un? Well, it's not that easy. First of all, paranoia breeds protection. And according to the many high-ranking North Korean defectors that have blown the whistle on the secretive regime, Kim Jong-un is very paranoid. This is the guy who executed his own uncle because he thought he was pawns of a Chinese conspiracy to dethrone him, to realize just how hard an assassination by a foreign agent would be. You have to look at North Korea's terrain and landscape. The hermit nation is notoriously tough to sneak into, let alone escape. A foreign agent would have to traverse 120,000 square kilometers of mountainous land full of the caverns already monitored by North Korean spies and military. If the spy even made it that far, they would somehow have to get close enough to the leader to take him out, which is a near impossibility given the large security he often travels with. Kim Jong-un keeps a tight circle of mostly family and constantly changes his location. Plus, any intervention from a foreign agent would only justify and validate the massive propaganda about the West and South Korea that's fed to North Koreans mostly. It's simply not enough to assassinate Kim Jong-un. You'll have to assassinate the entire Kim family, which leaves the option of assassination as highly unlikely to work unless it's performed by either one of the party members, a frustrated rep movement, or a family member. But finding a higher-up who is willing to risk their lives and stop the constant river of gifts and privileges that come with being on Kim Jong-un's good side would be nearly impossible. Mostly leads who realize their lives or endanger the facts instead of assassinate, much like Tae Yong-ho, a North Korean envoy who defected while traveling for diplomatic duty. A disloyal family member is not much of a bet either. They are more likely to run than assassinate Kim Jong-un after the force he showed towards his half-brother Kim Jong-nam and Uncle Yang Song. Take those who won't close are loyal to the core, or at least they know how to act the pots. But let's imagine Kim Jong-un is taken out in a combination of good luck and planning. What happens after? It's not promising. Either a member of the Workers' Party or more likely his wife or sister would hold the seat of power until one of his children is ready to take the throne. As that kid grows up, you can expect the full force of the North Korean army to unleash its fury as killing a head of state is not taken to currently, so we'd be back to square one. So if you're thinking that assassinations have too many unknown variables, and it would be better to wipe out all weapons, cripple any chance of fighting back and block any chance of Avengers leader being groomed for takeover, then go nuclear is your best option. It's the safest option for the country dropping the bomb, and it's deadly for North Korea and its weapons of mass destruction. The only problem is it's deadly for everybody else as well. There are currently 13,080 known nuclear warhead devices globally and 9 countries with nuclear capabilities. If you were to map them, China, Russia, the United States, United Kingdom, Pakistan, France, India, Israel and of course North Korea would have to be marked. Of these 9, the United States and Russia have the most. Russia the SOPAC with 6,257. While the United States follows with 5,550, China has around 351. North Korea has to do his count with just 50 to 60, and the sheer power of those is unimaginable, as today's nuclear bombs deliver a force at times that of the atomic bomb President Harry Truman drops on Hiroshima. A mushroom cloud over North Korea was pulled this saucer for neighboring countries like China, South Korea and Japan, so whichever country dropped that nuke would deal with the full force of these nations as well, from radiation poisoning to contaminated rain and waters that would cripple the fishing industry of the Korean peninsula. Nuclear hurts everyone here, not to mention millions of North Koreans that have nothing to do with Kim Jong-un's regime would suffer. The ultimate is one of the Cold War didn't see any bond as nations. Everybody knew it would be doomsday for everyone. Okay, so maybe no nuclear war. But how do you wipe out a rotten regime and bring democracy? It might be time to consider a good old invasion. If multiple nations came together, let's say France, Britain, the United States, South Korea, and Japan, North Korea, of course, wouldn't stand a chance. But the logistics of such an operation mixed with North Korea's location and the elements of their nuclear bombs would make it especially difficult. But let's take a look: China and Russia to the north, South Korea and Japan to the south and east. No way any army is marching in through Russian or Chinese borders, as these countries have traditionally been seen as the closest thing North Korea has to allies, and you can't drop soldiers in area that either because the guys in North Korea that watch the skies for a living will no doubt detect it. So we're left with either a seaside invasion or one that comes from South Korea. But of course North Korea knows this. This is why the demilitarized zone separating the north from the south is armed to the teeth with defense systems, including the soon-to-be cleared hypersonic missile that can potentially hit Seoul in 45 seconds if needed. So any gathering of the military forces it would take to stall North Korea on the sides would be sniffed out instantly. Entry through the Yellow Sea isn't happening either, as China isn't going to allow an army to park in his front yard and ambush the north. The Sea of Japan is a negative zone as well, because you've got Russia carefully watching, and even if they flip on North Korea, chances are Kim Jong-un's military tag would cut you hanging out here with a full Navy arsenal. Okay, but what if China and Russia get on board and we all just take the nation at once, then what? Well, then you'd have to find all the locations housing nuclear and other deadly weaponry. And that's where North Korea's isolation pays off, as there is little intel about where these weapons are hidden. But there are rumors about Boston underground networks where Kim Jong-un and his elite buddies will no doubt be moving through. They know where everything is. And therefore they have the true element of surprise for anyone who's boulders their way through, giving them the upper hand. Even if the highly skilled allies win out in the end, the casualties could be massive and involve many civilians and military personnel, most of which would be North and South Koreans given the closeness of Seoul. Then there's the reality of a leaderless nation. We know all too well that taking down a dictator has complications. Look at Iraq, Libya, Egypt, and the ongoing struggle in Yemen. There could be a worse evil brewing in North Korea, and with such little knowledge about the state of the country, an invasion becomes riskier. There's got to be a cleaner option, one that doesn't cause wild violence and mass casualty. Sometimes the best way to have a regime throw the hands up is to cut off their resources. It's time for some sanctions, not the ones that show up in news headlines, though real sanctions that involve North Korea's greatest lifeline, China. Not only do they share a border, but 80 to 90% of all North Korean trade comes from the People's Republic of China. China's alliance means Kim Jong-un can mostly ignore any UN or Western sanctions. But if you want to cut this relationship off, North Korea would be forced to open up to the world and deal with diplomatic negotiations and lesser military pursuits, or risk a revolution from North Korea's already frustrated citizens. But China has a pretty good reason for keeping the North and South separate. They even said they defend North Korea should the US strike first. But why won't this relationship is more about convenience for China than it is true support for Kim Jong-un's machine. Given the strategic location and South Korea's close ties to Washington, North Korea's existence is crucial to China. If Korea became one, then it's safe to assume that US troops would scoot right up to the Chinese border and plant a big fat military base direct with greater US military presence in Japan and South Korea. China isn't so keen on handing the Korean peninsula to the US, which is pretty understandable. But China is also not ready to receive the influx of refugees that result from a change in power or any instability in North Korea. So if the PRC is to join the allied nations against North Korea, they would have to be guaranteed that no US military presence would occur in Northern Korea. There would also have to be an international plan for North Korean refugees that wouldn't put the burden solely on China. This option, as impossible as it might seem, given the current geopolitical environment, is pretty legit since Kim Jong-un took power. He and China's President Xi Jinping haven't been seeing eye to eye. Observers suggest that the two of them aren't getting along too well, mostly because Kim Jong-un is obsessed with nuclear capability. Something Xi Jinping is not too happy about, meaning this would be the perfect time to convince China that supporting the dying empire is in their best interests. But the breakdown could take years, and the Kim regime has been known to put his people at risk to ensure its longevity. So maybe it's time to consider something completely different, something completely out of the ordinary. Enter the Moneyball. This would involve this simple act of dropping a boatload of counterfeit North Korean horn over the entire country. The visuals alone would be epic. All of this fake currency would float the North Korean market and drive up the cost and value of goods that in turn would drive down the value of the won and imbalance the demand and supply chain when it comes to the currency. The weekend one would lead to the country conceding and using foreign currency like the Chinese yuan or the US dollar to function daily, more so than it does currently. This would put North Korea at the mercy of foreign banks and financial structures, but it would also push Kim Gentleman and his leads to shift their funds around, creating alerts for those who monitor international funds of leaders. Kim would have to step off his weapons and drug trade side hustles to drum up money for military expansion. But the masses would be looking for answers. So yeah, the money bomb idea sounds absolutely